I'm deaf. I'm fully deaf. My parents didn't know that I was deaf until I was 18 months old. My world was completely different from my parents' world, as the hearing world. They thought that deaf was a negativity. I went to an ear, nose, and throat specialist. My parents said that I shouldn't learn sign language. I was apart from the hearing world, and I was taught how to speak and to fit in to the hearing world. I grew up learning how to speak and lip read. I had to fit into the hearing world. Whoa, it was a challenge. And it was frustrating. I did not have that full access of communication. When I was 3 years old, my first word was boat. My parents were driving, and I yelled, "Boat!" That's why I have 27 boats. My parents look back, and I realized that language is an important part of being deaf. And having a deaf child, with a language, it's normal. In the development, they have, and they can learn to speak later in their life. It's the most important part of a baby in their life is the language. At 3 years old, I was proud to be deaf. Sign language was dear to me. It opened up the world to me, more than before. I cherish deaf language, the culture and the history, and the community. And no, it's not a disability. It's just a language. We can do everything just the same as hearing people. We have successes, we have lawyers, we have successful doctors, scientists, engineers, teachers, educators, actors. We have deaf lawyers and deaf writers here. So, what I would like to talk about is the culture. Deaf culture is the same as any other culture. Just a Spanish, Mexican culture. They have their language just the same as we have our language that we cherish in our culture. So, let me give you an example of our deaf culture. So, I can be blunt. If someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, you've gained weight, what happened?" Hearing people don't do that. "Oh, you look good." Hearing people say, "Oh, that's wrong. You got the wrong clothes. Looks wrong." No, hearing people are too nice. Their culture. "Oh, you look good." See? It's nice. For example, another example, if someone dies, you'll ask, "What's wrong? What happened? How'd they die? Give me all the information." But a hearing culture, they'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss." And if a hearing student enters into my classroom and says, "Hey, I'm sorry that I'm late," I say, "That's fine." But if a deaf student enters the classroom, they say, "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I know because there was a car accident, something fell over, and the police officers arrived, and I had to get through," and they would go on and on and on and on for 3 minutes. Rather than just saying, "Sorry I'm late." It's part of their culture. And they cherish sharing their information. Let me tell you about our experience. If a hearing friend comes to my house for a party, they always stay for an hour and then they leave. That's it. But if deaf friends come, they'll stay forever and they'll leave at midnight and I still have to push them out. So, if we're at the restaurant, we're chatting and the manager comes up and says, "Hey, we're closing in 5 minutes." I say, okay. So we're still chatting for 10, 15 more minutes. Oh, then we get up and we move a little bit and we start chatting for 10, 15 minutes. We're still chatting. And then we go back to the door and we're still chatting. And the manager says, "We're turning off the lights. Get out of there." And then we move to the parking lot. And we're still saying goodbye. And we're chatting. And then we get in the car and we're still chatting. And then we leave. But the reason is we cherish information. We cherish sharing that information. In the hearing culture, you can hear all these different things going by every day. But in sign language, the information is communicated through each other. And that's shared, and that's important to us and to our culture. I want to talk about sign language. Sign language is not new. It's been here for thousands of years. We have to fight every day to protect our language. We experience a lot of pressure and from other different groups, just like they kind of have a discrimination. Let's look back into our history. 45 BC, in the Greek mythology time, they wrote mythological characteristics. He quoted, "If you don't have a voice, but you want to express yourselves and your feelings and your opinions, but you can't, but look, why don't we just copy the deaf people and their gesturing and their body language and their facial expressions and their hand movements? Oh, you can express it that way." And that sign language has been here for years. So here in America, back in 65 years, with Martha's Vineyard, it's an island, a group of deaf people lived there for generations. Everyone for generations. And everyone on the island spoke sign language. Everybody who was hearing, they even did sign language as well. Everyone understood each other. The community, the events, different things, they would always be signing. Everybody would accept it. Later on, about 1870, the first formal deaf education program was established in America's School for the Deaf. That's for deaf children on the island who moved to that school. And many of them graduated and went on to other states and founded different schools. A lot of education for the community. A lot of people were establishing, and even in Gallaudet, the world's first university was founded in 1874. They gave deaf people degrees, and many deaf people graduated. And people from the deaf school before it went over to the Gallaudet. They were friendly, and they were very successful people, interacting with hearing people. And it was just very nice. 6 years later, in 1880, it's something that the deaf people will never forget. It's ingrained in our minds. It was a huge impact for the community. The world had a conference in Italy for deaf education. They voted to ban sign language. They must teach deaf people how to speak and interact with everybody. So that changed the deaf world. It flipped it upside down. They fired all of the deaf teachers, and they replaced it with hearing teachers to teach them to speak, to teach the deaf children how to speak. That impacted the deaf world. It was such a dark experience. It was separated. These two worlds were separated. The signing world and the speaking world. It was a dark time. We were suffering for years. What happened in 1960, Gallaudet University had an English teacher. He recognized that sign language he was observing sign language. And finally, he realized it was a true language itself. Had context, had grammar, hand shapes, used the space and the movement and the facial expressions. He realized that the language ASL is not set up the same way as English. With that, we finally were able to get our community back. We were able to develop and continue forward. Around that time, many hearing children of deaf adults, CODAs, they grew up in the deaf community, born deaf, they had the responsibility of interpreters. So the interpreters would be able to help facilitate the communication. We didn't have enough. We were hoping to have more deaf people born at that time. So finally in the 1870s, more college interpreting training programs were all over the States. And it was just booming. And the hearing world was clueless. They were accessing the hearing world to the interpreting for years for the languages. They had to learn the culture itself. And they found this experience such a challenge, translating from sign language to spoken English. Up to today, you will see it, new movements. Deaf children took the responsibility to be the interpreter, and they had to understand the culture itself. So we're talking about deaf interpreters. The deaf interpreters would take on the information, and then they would interpret that for the hearing interpreter, and the hearing interpreter would then speak English. So if you look back, like 1880, now the deaf interpreter, we'll see more of them interpreting at courts, at pharmacies, at hospitals, all of these broad things. They're facilitating communication to two separate worlds, interpreting all of these communications. But back in 1880, if they never voted to ban sign language from the community, and the deaf teachers were still, and everybody was signing in 1880 that banned. So if that experience never happened, what would that mean? Would everybody be signing with us? The whole world? We would not need interpreters. Would we go back to Martha's Vineyard? We'd be signing every day. We'd be communicating that way. That's something to think about. Thank you.